This is one of the most striking Gospels in all of Scripture when you really think of what happened here. Let me put it in other terms. Let's say today you're at home realizing there's no NFL game to watch. Certainly the Lions aren't playing in any NFL game. And you decide, hey, what can I do today? You're thinking about your checklist, your honey-do list, and you're deciding, what's the easiest? What do I got to do here? And there's a knock on the door. And there's a Middle Eastern man standing there. And he just looks at you. And then, suddenly, all of your honey-do list items are checked off. They're all finished, miraculously. And then he looks at you again and says, come, follow me. Come, follow me. For anyone who has been called to priesthood, and there's two of us in this sanctuary, maybe one or two out there who chose not to take up the invitation because the invitation doesn't have to be answered. We feel this a little more strikingly sometimes than others, because this is the gospel of vocation. Come, follow me. The first time I heard this, I was 6 years old. Come, John, follow me. And then I heard it very strongly when I was in 8th grade. I was kneeling in prayer because I had snuck back in the church from the playground at St. Germain's School in St. Clair Shores. Walked into the chapel, into the church, and suddenly I felt a hand on my shoulder. The sun was beaming in directly from the stained glass windows onto the tabernacle, and my eyes were fixed on the tabernacle. And the hand was Father LaSalle Lank, who only said one thing to me, and we never talked about it again. John, it's okay if you want to become a priest. If he's calling you, you'll know. Now, the Twilight Zone music should have been going on behind me at that juncture. And then into high school, the same thing. Come, follow me. I then met my first attractive young lady friend in college at the University of Michigan and said, after I heard, come, follow me, maybe later. And that battle back and forth went on for me for a couple decades. And finally, after I retired from the Navy, I was in my early 50s, I finally said, yes, Lord. Yes, I'll follow. Now, we hope it doesn't take dudes that long to make up their mind. But hey, I had an exciting life, so. But the adage of the story is that if the Lord wants you to come, he doesn't stop calling. In our sanctuary today, we have another lad who said yes when he got the invitation. And getting the invitation, I'll tell you, as a guy who's received it, is kind of terrifying. It's wonderful and terrifying at the same time. Because all of your other plans as a normal dude have just been set aside, and you know in the end you're going to have to do this. Because you've heard the words that Peter heard. Come, follow me. The three most compelling words, in my opinion, in Scripture, other than the words of the angel, why are you looking for the living among the dead? He is not here. He has risen. Those are the only other superior words I know of. Come, follow me. Now, as a church, we like to say that this command, this inventory command, because it's half invitation, half directive. And as a naval officer, I'm used to just following orders, is just directed at those called the priesthood. And that is not true. And a lot of us, I know when I was a layperson, I did this. I know a ton of parents who do this. I know a ton of grandparents that do this in a lot of parishes. Well, that's the priest's job. My son or daughter doesn't know much about the faith. That's the priest's job. That's sister's job. But when I was a little boy, that job was pretty much done by sister. How many went to Catholic education and had a sister teach them? Yeah. You know your theology, don't you? It was either that or get lashed by a long rosary in the hallway right afterwards. Okay? You knew your stuff. They're gone. They're not coming back. Convents are virtually empty. There's a slight resurgence in a Dominican order in Ann Arbor, but most of them are gone. That building next to us, the rectory that's being rehabbed or will be rehabbed, I don't know how many of you have been in it, but it's actually a convent. It's not a rectory. It's got bathrooms that look like the bathrooms over at St. Mary's School. And I stress this because these wonderful women for decades, for centuries, led very humble lives. They took vows of poverty. Diocesan priests do not take vows of poverty. And they submitted themselves utterly to God's will. They're gone. And as we conclude Catholic Education Week, Catholic Schools Week, we have to understand that there's no one there to fill the gap. In the Archdiocese of Detroit, we have somewhere around 280 priests or so. They've done a program that shows us where we're going to be in 10 years. How does the sound of 120 sound? And declining. I've been in a submarine when it dives, and that's what those numbers look like. Dive, dive, dive. And so that's why this thing called Family of Parishes has come forward. Because there's no one left, boys and girls. And so we have to ask ourselves, we have to put before ourselves, finally, now in the end, the tough questions we have been demurring and demurring and demurring for 4 decades since this problem started. Is it me, Lord? Just like that beautiful song asks the question, is it I? And the answer for all of us is, yeah, it's everyone. Our children are not catechized because we permit them not to be catechized. Our grandchildren are not catechized because we have allowed and countenanced them not to be catechized. Our kids don't know how to make the sign of the cross because we permit it. Our kids can't say the rosary because we permit it. Our kids don't know the saints because we tolerate it. Our kids don't feel the need to go to Mass because we countenance it. No, that's not me yelling at you. That's not me scolding you. One of the 3 negative letters I've gotten here was saying, don't scold the children at school. And that stemmed from one of my first Masses with them, and I said, boys and girls, if we were to get a grade today, it might be a D because you don't know the responses to the prayers at Mass. I'm sure your teachers will fix that. And then the next week I gave them an A. But it's important. Well, that's because Maureen and the rest of the teachers got on them big time that week. We've come into this society of helicopter parenting and wanting to be our children's best friends, whereby we no longer correct. Each of them walks around with an $800 iPhone. That's our society. We have to ask ourselves, what are we going to do to answer the call of Scripture? Come, follow me. Simon Peter and the sons of thunder, James and John, knowingly and intelligently left their business. Could you imagine? Lawyers, doctors, engineers, plumbers, real estate agents, teachers, everyone. When the Lord calls you and said, come, follow me, would you actually answer? And what would be your answer? Well, let's be honest. What would be the answer? Are you kidding me? Who's going to make the mortgage payment? Who's going to pay the electric bill? And that's why I commend to you, we're having this program about for our young people watching this great series, The Chosen. The response of these apostles was literally, here I am. I'm here. I'll follow. For they saw Christ in his magnificence, and this was before he was even showing off a little bit. Yeah, the fish was pretty convincing, but they continued to have their doubts. Much later on, towards the end of his ministry, when he feeds 10,000 people. I say 10,000 because, remember, they didn't count the women as people. And half would have been women. When he fed all these people, they still had doubts. We are people that inherently doubt. We're always living for now. We're always living for this place. For how big our bank account is. And that's understandable. I don't even criticize that. I'm not castigating that. It's being human. But now we have to protect our faith. We have to protect our church. We have to look at the successors of those men who are your priests now. We have to walk up to young men and not so young men in our society and say, have you thought of becoming a priest? And by the way, that takes guts, because that's going to make that person a little uncomfortable for a few minutes, because he's probably been running away from that question for a long time. And all of us as lay people in our lives, we have to be prepared to answer the question, come follow me. Not only in how we raise our children and how we raise our grandchildren and how we put the wonderful stories of the saints in front of them and how we put the wonderful stories of the church in front of them and how we teach them about the wonderment of Scripture and the greater wonderment of the sacraments. We have to also ask ourselves, what kind of example am I living in the manner in which I live? Are you living that call of the Christ? Are you following him? Do you treat your fellow men and women that way? Or are you of yourself? I take care of mine. I take care of my family. It's all I'm responsible for. We know that's not the case. You're responsible for the stranger. You're responsible for the foreigner. You're responsible for the starving. You're responsible for the naked. You're responsible for those unjustifiably in prison. How do we know this? Because he told us so. That's the final exam for getting into heaven. I was hungry, did you feed me? I was naked, did you clothe me? I was a foreigner, did you welcome me? I was in prison, did you visit me?